Have my next guest, Dr. Dan Diker, is the president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, the JCFA. Dan, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Jeremy. A pleasure to be on the program and to see the type of moral clarity that Member of Parliament Katie Lamb has expressed. Being an Anglophile many times a year in the UK and London, it's really a pleasure to see common sense on the TV.
Thank you, my friend. I've been raging for days. I don't really know where to start. In fact, I do know where to start. We did this on Monday, and I put this out there, and people responded. I have been an absolutely staunch supporter of Israelis and Jewish people since I have Jewish friends, and I have said for as long as I can remember that I find any form of racism abhorrent, but I fail to understand in the world we live in at the age that I am now, 60, how anti-Semitism isn't given the same abhorrence as any other racism. It's a disgusting thing. And the irony for me is that the Muslim community, and I'm talking about extremist Muslims, Islam, whatever you want to call it, they make no secret of the fact that to them, the Jewish population, the Israeli population, whatever you want to say, is not something that they favour. How ironic, Dan, that on Saturday and Sunday, overnight, with America, it was Israel who potentially freed millions of Muslims from the oppression of a rule of a man who, for terrorism, that was his second hobby. And I think that's a very good way to start with you, my friend.
I think it is too, Jeremy. Very well said. And let me express my deep appreciation from the middle of Jerusalem for your sympathy and common sense regarding the scourge of Jew hatred and the hatred of the Jewish state. It was, frankly, it was no less than Winston Churchill, one of the greatest prime ministers in the history of the free world, who recognized the Jewish people's right to return to Israel, their 3,600-year ancient homeland, and he worked very much to strengthen, as the great British historian Andrew Roberts has written again and again and again, his strong relationship with the Jewish community. What we are witnessing today, Jeremy, is an unprecedented, horrific rise in Jew hatred. I think people like dead Jews, and they like Jews that are unable to defend themselves. And I think for those people, unfortunately, Israel, as the eternal home of the nations, the eternal home of the Jewish people, that, by the way, we have 2 million Muslims here that live in freedom, that have exactly the same rights as every Jewish Israeli. And we are now faced with the most historic moment in the last 100 years since the Sykes-Picot Agreement divided up the Middle East. And that is that we all face what hopefully will be the finest hour, as Prime Minister Churchill had said when he was fighting the Nazis in the streets, in the hills, in the cities. We are fighting the Nazi regime of our time. And Israel has been on the target list since 1979, as has the United States. And by the way, hundreds of Brits have lost their lives to the same Iranian regime. It just seems to me that many Brits are unaware of it.
Well, let me tell you what Britain isn't unaware of, if this shows anything to go by, which gains traction more and more so each and every day. And there's an argument here amongst certain, internationally law-led lawyers that we shouldn't have been there initially. I happen to believe differently. But what I will absolutely want to ask you is, the Gulf states this morning are labelling our Prime Minister as weak, which I absolutely agree. His response to sending any ships to Cyprus yesterday is beyond embarrassment. Trump continues to lay into him. Yesterday he said it's not necessarily Churchill are dealing with. Today he's calling him a loser with no future and no friends. How disappointed has Israel been by United Kingdom's response, my friend?
Well, I have to be honest, because I am a big fan of the United Kingdom. There is a strong sense of overall disappointment with Europe, but beyond that, the United Kingdom for Israel plays a very important role for Europe, because we look at the United Kingdom as a model, a strategic and moral model for the rest of Europe. And right now there is a sense of disappointment because of the opposition that Prime Minister Starmer has expressed the difficulties he's had allowing the United States to use the Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean, his difficulty with immediate response to the Iranian regime attack on British sovereignty in Cyprus.
Listen, and I'll tell you, and I go further than that. I mean, I keep meeting this brick wall of international law, which I personally think is a movable feast that people use, and I'm desperate to look in somebody like Starmer's face, Dan, and say, international law did not apply to the Ayatollah Khomeini when he financed Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, ISIS to blow up English kids at the Manchester Arena bombing. I'd love to know what these people do. Listen, lots of people listening to this will say we shouldn't have gone in. For me, as I say, I think differently, but I just personally... I'm so embarrassed by the ineptitude of our Prime Minister, by this dragging his feet. And the truth is, you might know this, you might not. He is being accused quite rightly in the United Kingdom of playing politics. He's interested more in shoring up his supporters than he is doing right by the country. And for me, that's the real crux here. A leader sometimes makes decisions that are unpopular even with his own voter base, but he does it because he's the leader of this country. And that's where I think Keir Starmer fails massively.
Well, I think that's a very important observation, Jeremy, and I think that the example rests with President Trump. Look, the American people, according to the most recent polls, are uncertain and skeptical at the American leadership in this campaign. And I can tell you, as an American and as an Israeli, that this is the potentially the finest hour for the United States and the Western Alliance. This is the Nazi regime of our era. This is a regime that has attempted to assassinate more than 20 to 22 Brits in the last 2.5 years alone. This is a regime that, that has no qualms about mass murdering up to 50,000 innocent Iranians. And the question is, where is the free world? Where are the human rights people? Where is the liberal international order? Well, I'll tell you where they are. They are obsessed with what's called the Palestinian issue. And basically, because it is Israel and the United States that are leading this crusade to save the West, frankly. It's not about Israel and the Jews, for goodness sakes. This is about a regime, as you and I know, that if they were to acquire nuclear weapons, and believe me, with all this nonsense talk about international law, this regime was within weeks in 2025 of obtaining and putting together 11 nuclear devices. And I can promise you that those devices would have been passed to the same terrorists that murdered Brits on 7/7, if we remember that. Yeah. This is very, very important to emphasize the Iranian regime's acute threat and capability to destroy the West. This is what they've been saying since 1979. People have not been paying attention. The United States public has been paying less attention, and the British public as well. And I think that it's up to our leaders to engage in moral and strategic clarity and understand that what is happening today is no less a move than saving Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, as it is from this murderous regime that will use nuclear weapons if they were able to attain them.
I couldn't put it any better myself. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please, Dan Diker, President, Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, come on whenever, because I think it's really, really important to put both sides of the coin. We sit here hamstrung in the United Kingdom by bloody international. See the passion in that guy's voice? He talks about these mad mullahs. I've said it every single day, right? They have sponsored every terrorist group. Our own Defence Secretary on Monday said there were 20 terror plots to kill Brits on the streets of Britain foiled by... let's have it out there. Terrorist groups paid for by the man who was taken out. That's the point. And I'll go back to what he said. There are people in America who disagree with those initial strikes. There are people in England who do. But we're talking about a regime that doesn't give a toss about international law. And I've got a Prime Minister who won't fart unless he goes to court to work out whether he should or he shouldn't. Mark, good morning.
Morning, Jezza. Mark from